He starts opening fire, starts shooting. It was a nightmare.
It's easy to immediately generalize and wonder, what are we coming to? That people feel that this is a way to solve any problem.
You see it happen elsewhere, and you pray that it never happens to you, and unfortunately, you can't control people's minds and what they're going to do.
The town of Killeen is in shock tonight after a gunman opens fire on a crowded cafeteria, killing 22 people before turning the gun on himself. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this expanded edition of the News 8 Update. It ranks as the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. It all began shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon. Police say a man drove his pickup truck through the front of Luby's Cafeteria on Highway 190 in Killeen. Chip Moody joins us now from the scene with the latest. Chip?
All right, thank you very much, Tracy. I'm standing just outside the Luby's Cafeteria, the scene of today's mass killing. It has been an incredible day for Central Texas, and the incredible story is still unfolding as we talk now. Even at this hour, this Central Texas town of about 50,000 residents is still trying to grapple with the events, the cause, the aftermath of this mass killing. Tonight, the grim process of removing the bodies from the restaurant began around 8 o'clock, about 2 hours ago. The bodies are being transported to Dallas for autopsies by the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office. Now, for Bell County authorities, this is routine in murder cases. What's not routine, of course, is that the number of victims is very high. The horror began during the lunch hour today at 12:40.
Suddenly, with no warning, a blue pickup truck came crashing through the big glass window of the restaurant's dining room. It was no accident. The driver meant to crash into the dining room, and he kept on accelerating, running over several tables and the people who were sitting at them. The truck finally came to rest completely inside the dining room. When the truck stopped, witnesses say the man started shooting before getting out. He then walked over and shot 2 people he had just run over. Steve and Jean Gaither from the Dallas suburb of DeSoto were having lunch when the nightmare began.
He just kept on shooting. Just kept
randomly
on shooting.
Shot anybody in his path.
I thought it was the backfire from the car at first. And then he pulled me underneath the table, and then it just kept on going and going. He just kept shooting and shooting, and it wasn't going to stop.
The gunman has been identified as 35-year-old George Hennard, an unemployed resident of Belton, just 7 miles down the road. Witnesses say he told the people in the restaurant in a loud but clear voice, "This is what Bell County has done to me. Was it worth it? Was it worth it?"
We were standing there, you know, serving, and when he walked in, when he drove in, he just started shooting everywhere. No, at no particular person, just shooting. Just wanted to kill everybody, I guess. I don't know. He was mad.
Other witnesses and police say Hennard was methodical and deliberate and was using a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, which carried as many as 18 bullets per clip, and that he reloaded the gun at least twice. Hennard moved deliberately from table to table. In some cases, he would shoot people cowering under their table. In other cases, he would let them live. He told one woman that she should take her daughter out of danger. But at the next table, he shot and killed 2 people. There seemed to be no pattern. And after calmly killing some of the victims, Hennard asked, was it worth it? In desperation, a man at the rear of the dining room threw a chair through a window, which allowed about 15 customers to scramble to safety. Outside the restaurant, 3 plainclothes DPS officers heard the shooting and ran in the front door, guns drawn. A gun battle then broke out, and Hennard was wounded. Police say he retreated to a bathroom where, according to officers, he put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger, committing suicide. Even helicopters from Fort Hood responded to the call to help remove the more seriously wounded. As word of the massacre spread around this town of 50,000 people, friends and relatives began arriving at the cafeteria and the shopping center. For some, there was relief and happiness, but for others, the news was bad. In addition to those killed outright in the cafeteria, 23 others were wounded and taken to area hospitals.
As we mentioned just a moment ago, specific details of this story are still unfolding even at this hour. For instance, we have just now confirmed that among those killed today were 3 top school administrators for the Killeen School District. This was Boss's Day, and a number of organizations had their celebrations at the Luby's Cafeteria and were inside when the shooting occurred. So we have just learned that 3 top school administrators from the Killeen School District are among the dead victims. Channel 8's Robert Riggs is among the people we have here from Channel 8 covering the story today. Robert has been following how the law enforcement agencies have been responding, and he has an incredible story from the Texas Department of Public Safety spokesman Mike Cox and from the Killeen Police Department. Let's go to Robert Riggs right now for the latest on that. Robert?
Chip, 2 Department of Public Safety officers who confronted the gunman were shaken by what they found. One says that the heaps of bodies in the cafeteria reminded him of Jonestown. Another one said that the victims were like covey of doves under the tables. Most of the victims had been shot in the head, executed where they were eating. The Department of Public Safety officers happened to be next door at the Sheraton Hotel teaching Killeen police officers on how to prevent auto theft. During a break around 12:45, 12:40, they were outside. They heard glass breaking. Then they heard a muzzled pop. Then a woman came running toward them screaming, "He's crazy. He's got a gun. He's killing everybody." The officers, who were in plain clothes and unarmed, then had to run to their cars, get their weapons, and then headed to the cafeteria. Mike Cox is here. And Mike, I want you to describe what happened from then on, and tell me about the heroic events of these 2 officers who, if they had not intervened when they did, there likely would have been more people killed.
I don't think there's any question that we've got 2 heroes we're talking about here. And these 2 men are Sergeant Jody Ford, who's 55 years old, stationed in Waco. The other sergeant is Bill Cooper, 31 years old, stationed at Hearst. Both of these are plainclothes investigators in our motor vehicle theft service.
Okay, Sergeant Ford ran to the front door, saw the gunman. He was about 75 yards away, and then shot.
Sergeant Ford could see the man in there with the gun. Sergeant Ford saw him several times shoot. You could tell he was shooting people. Sergeant Ford finally got a clear shot, best he could get, at about 75 yards away. He fired 4 rounds from his 9mm service handgun. He said the man appeared to jerk back like that, and he's not sure. He does not think that his rounds hit the man. Meanwhile, Sergeant Bill Cooper had gotten inside the restaurant with some officers with the Killeen Police Department. Sergeant Cooper slowly worked his way toward the back where the gunman was, dodging between tables. At one point, the gunman fired a shot at our officer and blew up a coffee cup on top of a table. The officer was nearby.
Now, there was mayhem inside. I understand people were begging the officers for help and didn't quite understand what was going on, that suddenly these gentlemen had come in plain clothes firing.
One of our officers did have on a black raid jacket that said state police, but these people were frantic. Our guys, they later apologized for being rough, but they were telling people to get out of the way, to get down, and people were pulling on their pants legs, begging for help. Sergeant Ford told me that he's pretty sure that one man died holding his hand, pleading for help. They both said it was the most terrible thing they saw. The worst thing they said they saw, an elderly woman was leaning over the body of her husband who'd already been shot, apparently trying to protect him. The gunman came up. The woman sort of looked up, and the gunman pointed his pistol at her, and she just sort of bowed her head like that, and he shot her in the top of the head as our guy looked on. But at this point, our officer was helpless. He could not have fired any shots for fear of hurting somebody else.
And at this point, then, the gunman laid down flat on his stomach on the floor, and there was a standoff.
Yes, our officer and some Killeen officers got him cornered in the back of the restaurant. He was pointing his pistol like that and swinging it back and forth between our officers. Our officer said that at one point he could have killed him, but his gun was jammed, and he said if he'd ever pointed the gun closer at him, he would have. But before he did that, the man turned over on his back and shot himself in the head one time with his pistol.
Mike Cox, thank you very much. The officers found that he was armed with 2 weapons, one a 9mm handgun called a stovepipe. He still had 28 rounds of ammunition. Police still don't know what motivated this man to commit this carnage. Chip.
All right, thank you very much, Robert. Who and why have been the 2 big questions here in Killeen today. We have the answers on who, and we have some theories as to why. The 35-year-old gunman, unemployed resident of Belton, about 10 or 12 miles from here. And Channel 8's Mary Stewart has been in the neighborhood around his house and has talked to some residents who say they have known that the man was very dangerous and, in fact, warned police about him. We go now to Channel 8's Mary Stewart live in Belton. Mary?
Well, Chip, neighbors say that George Hennard was unemployed at the current time, although he claims that he's worked in and around ships, possibly in the Coast Guard, for the past 17 years. Neighbors in the small town where he lived, Belton, 12 miles east of here, paint a picture of Hennard as a very troubled man. They say he was aloof and his family was peculiar.
He seemed like he was by himself and he felt like everybody was against him.
Clerk Mary Mead says George Hennard started his day as usual at 6 o'clock at a convenience store near the two-story colonial that belonged to his mother. Hennard bought $3 worth of snacks and signed the receipt, promising to return to pay later in the day. The clerk remembers her customer's violent temper and the day several months ago when he gave her an ominous warning.
He said that if they didn't stop messing around his house, that something bad was going to happen. And he wanted me to tell everybody. I don't know why he told me.
This summer, a neighbor and her daughter received a letter from the gunman. He enclosed photos of himself and an address in Nevada where he was temporarily living. Hennard suggested meeting the women.
Do you think the three of us can get together someday? Please give me the satisfaction of someday laughing in the face of all those mostly white, treacherous female vipers from those two towns who tried to destroy me and my family. I will, no matter what, prevail over the female vipers in those two rinky-dink towns in Texas. I will prevail in the bitter end.
Hennard had several run-ins with police. He called them 3 and 4 times a day, complaining about imaginary noises in the neighborhood. Police told neighbors Hennard planned to move. His mother's house is for sale. So too is the antique shop she operated until it went out of business. Other neighbors complained Hennard yelled obscenities at them as he worked in the yard.
He acted like he knew me. I never said a word, and he cussed me out and said, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. Okay, just keep pushing, but worse than that.
Hennard's father, a Swiss-born orthopedic surgeon, moved out of the two-story colonial after a divorce several years ago. When potential buyers toured the home, they suspected the gunman may have been hiding drugs.
Well, some people toured it and made an offer on it, and they said he was extremely impolite to them, and he didn't want them to come in one room, which seemed strange, and there was something on a table or something that was covered up. They didn't know what it was.
Now, as to a motive, neighbors have several theories as to a possible motive, including the fact that Hennard may have been on drugs. They also theorize that, according to the letter that you just heard a portion of aired, he wanted to lash back at a few small towns, 2 small towns in Texas. We know that Belton was one of those small towns. Now, whether Killeen was the other small town, he did not mention in the letter that he sent to the neighbors. Investigators will certainly be looking into that over the next few days. I'm Mary Stewart, reporting live. Back to you, Chip.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. A 32-year-old man by the name of James Dunlap says he and the gunman, Hennard, were roommates back in 1982 in the city of Temple, not too far from here. Dunlap says that Hennard was once a merchant marine, and he remembers him as a very hostile person.
Had a very explosive temper and very violent temper. He'd throw things when he'd get mad, put his fist through a wall if he got mad, hit things, knock things over, yell and scream at people a lot. He was, would do that quite a bit. He made several references about wanting to kill people. He was a very prejudiced person, so.
As Mary was telling us, some of his neighbors had also complained to police, saying the man would be screaming out loud in the middle of the night, waking them up. He lived in a fairly well-to-do neighborhood, but many of the neighbors called police and said something is wrong with the man. He continues to yell and scream. He's talking to himself. So he does have a record of some mental aberrations. We also have now a partial list of some of those who were killed today. We have 8 names to present to you. Authorities have been going about the very difficult and very emotional task of identifying the families of those who were killed today. As we mentioned at the top of the newscast, 3 top administrators from the Killeen Independent School District are among those killed. Obviously, we do not have all the names as yet because authorities are still in the process of connecting up with relatives, visiting with them, and explaining to them what happened. A large number of clergymen, pastors, and in fact some military chaplains have been standing by at the command headquarters at the Sheraton Hotel to lend assistance if they can. For those folks who are out of town and have relatives or very close friends who may have been involved in the shooting, there is this phone number you can call. It's area code 817-634-1555. That's 817-634-1555. And then you are requested to ask for extension 189. That is the Red Cross is manning the Red Cross is manning that particular telephone, and they have a complete list of all of those who were injured, the 23 people who were injured. There are 23 people who were taken to 3 different hospitals here in Central Texas. The Darnell Army Hospital at Fort Hood, I believe 10 people went to Darnell Army Hospital. Another 8 went to the Metroplex Hospital in Killeen, and Scott and White Memorial Hospital picked up another half a dozen or so. Channel 8's Michael Hill went to the Metroplex Hospital and has this report.
They came here seeking confirmation a relative had been brought to Metroplex Hospital, but when they got the news, it was too much. Doctors treated 8 survivors of the assault, 7 of them victims of gunshot wounds.
We did not have any head injuries that we received. We did not have any chest injuries. Our injuries were hip, abdominal, and lower extremity.
At least one 40-year-old Kirby Lack required surgery to remove a bullet described as 2 inches in diameter. The bullet had damaged his bladder.
He was very upset and quite perturbed.
As she was recovering from emotional shock, 45-year-old Kelly Fitzwater and her husband Johnny described the truck crashing through the window.
And when I looked over, I saw a table and a man flying through the air from it.
The Fitzwaters hit the floor as the gunman began calmly firing at his victims.
And I'm not real sure whether she moved or what, but when the first shot was fired, he hollers and says, "You bitch." And this is directly in front of me. And when that happened, his shell or projectile shell came out on my hand.
When he shot that lady next to you, what did you say to yourself?
I said, "Oh my God."
The gunman was just an arm's length away from the Fitzwaters, but he passed them.
I think God had a lot to do with it.
The Fitzwaters, of course, managed to escape as the gunman passed them by. 5 others, though, remain at the Metroplex Hospital. 12 wounded survivors went to the Darnell Army Hospital. 7 have been treated and released. 5 remain there tonight. 2 in critical condition, 1 guarded, 2 in fair. A footnote about all of tonight and what happened today. This is about a survivor, 41-year-old Maria Cerner. Doctors at Metroplex Hospital this afternoon treated her for, of all things, exposure and then released her. Here's her story. As this horrible tale was unfolding, Cerner managed to slip into a freezer inside of Luby's, and she stayed there for about 3 hours. And when she thought it was safe, she came out and went to the hospital. She's at home tonight resting and declining to talk about her cold refuge from this madness. Chip?
All right, thank you very much, Michael. Those of us who are covering the story are relatively isolated from the rest of the community. This is about a 3-square-block area that has been cordoned off by police. Reporters and cameramen are, of course, allowed inside that. But for the most part, the community is taken away from here. They are on the other side of the fence. Channel 8's Ana Martinez has gone out into the community to find out how the community is reacting. This is not a large town, only about 50,000 residents, and so it's a very close-knit town in many ways. Ana, let's go to you, and what did you find out in the community?
Chip, really right now the city is really just beginning to grasp the magnitude of this man-made disaster. Now news of the tragedy spread very quickly. Townspeople were even more quick to react to it. The Sheraton Hotel is serving as the command post for this tragedy. Throughout the day, people have come here searching for information about loved ones. Victims' names and their conditions are posted. Counseling for victims, their loved ones, and witnesses is being offered here. Some of those witnesses are still reeling from what they saw.
He shot at me when I was yelling Angie's name. I went through the window where he crashed through, and after I had realized that he had already shot the first man, I was screaming Angie's name, and I startled him, I guess. he turned around. That's when he fired at me, so I ducked, and then I went to the food to go.
The restaurant sits just off Highway 190. Many townsfolk drove by as soon as they heard about the tragedy. Many others stopped by just to watch, some out of a sense of curiosity, others out of a sense of compassion for their neighbors.
I think everybody does wants to know if they know of anyone, if they have any loved ones that were involved. It's a tragic thing that's happened here, and I think that people just want to come out and see for themselves what really did happen.
At a news conference, the mayor pro tem expressed his sorrow over what's happened and announced a memorial trust fund has been set up at the First National Bank of Killeen. Meanwhile, at the command post, disaster relief efforts are continuing. The town of Killeen never expected to deal with a tragedy like this, but Red Cross officials say the community is pulling together as best it can.
We're trying to handle it with our local resources because it's been tremendous. It's people helping people in a community. We have volunteers that are willing to come out and work all night. It's been gratifying to see this kind of response.
The governor has sent some crisis intervention counselors down here to Killeen to try to help people deal with this problem. Counselors in this city are not used to dealing with this kind of tragedy, so they're having to get some special instruction as to what to tell the people who are coming to them for help. Another thing we want to let you know about is the command post is here. Chip gave you the number earlier where people can call for information in case you are needing some help, in case you're trying to find out if one of your relatives has been involved in this in any way. That command post here at the Sheraton Hotel in Killeen, right off Highway 190. Also, Luby's has made some special arrangements with La Quinta Hotels. They have rented 50 rooms so that relatives who are in town looking to find out whether or not their relatives have been harmed will have a place to stay. Chip, for now, that's all. Back to you.
We would like to tell you that we have been informed that the last of the bodies have now been removed from the Luby's Cafeteria. Just behind me, I don't know if you can see that window, but that's the window that some of the people inside, the patrons, threw chairs through to escape. About 15 people managed to scramble through that window to safety during the shooting spree today. This is kind of interesting. It's an ironic note, I suppose, to some extent, but there were more people killed here at the Luby's restaurant in Killeen today than the number of Fort Hood soldiers who were killed in the Persian Gulf War. I'm told that 11 soldiers died in the Persian Gulf conflict who were from Fort Hood, and of course today's total is 22 innocent victims, the 23rd victim being the gunman himself. Tracy, that's the scene here right now. Let's go back to you. I understand there's a few more tidbits of information.
Thank you, Chip. Yes, in a statement released by San Antonio-based Luby's Cafeteria, the company says it's deeply concerned for the victims and their families and extended its deepest sympathies over the tragic shooting.
We're doing everything we possibly can to comfort and console the families and whatever we can do. There's no protection for mad acts that occur like this. There was nothing that we could say that we wish we could have done to avoid this. No.
The mayor pro tem of Killeen, Fred Latham, says a memorial trust fund has been set up for the families of shooting victims. Luby's Cafeteria has donated the first $10,000 to that fund. And as Anna reported just a few minutes ago, Luby's has also reserved 50 motel rooms in Killeen for families of the victims. And the Red Cross has also set up a counseling program to offer assistance to grieving relatives and survivors of today's shooting. The gun used in the Killeen massacre was a Glock. That's an Austrian-made semi-automatic pistol. The Glock was among the first of the so-called Glamour 9s. That's high-capacity semi-automatic 9mm pistols. A 9mm is equivalent to a .38 caliber. The Glock attracted much attention not only because it's made partly of plastic, but because its magazine will hold 17 bullets. A crime control bill that comes before Congress tomorrow would not outlaw such pistols as the Glock, but would prohibit the high-capacity magazines they use. 25 years ago, Texas gained a dark place in history because of mass murders. Since then, similar killings have created a record of murders which seem to plague the United States. The campus tower at the University of Texas at Austin was a murder platform for Charles Whitman in 1966. Whitman killed 16 people and wounded another 31, firing a rifle from the tower's observation deck. The shootings alerted police departments to the threat of mass murder. But mass shootings did not cease. In 1984, a McDonald's restaurant in San Ysidro, California became a murder site for an unemployed security guard. 41-year-old James Huberty unloaded his Uzi on 21 people, killing all of them, then wounding 19 more. A police sharpshooter finally killed the gunman, and the McDonald's shooting stood as the deadliest in U.S. history. Today's shooting in Killeen now becomes the worst shooting massacre in American history. There is another major story this evening, this one in the world of sports, and Dale joins us now with that story. Dale, there's been another development now in Killeen. Let's go back there live to Channel 8's Chip Moody. Chip?
Tracy, as you might imagine, right after today's shooting, the entire area around the cafeteria, the Luby's Cafeteria, was cordoned off so people could not go inside. Law enforcement officers also closed all the curtains in the restaurant so nobody was able to look inside. As you remember, as we told you earlier, they kept the bodies in there for several hours, just removing the last of them a few minutes ago. Well, now they have opened up some of the curtains. This is our first look inside the restaurant. It's not a very close-up look, but as you can see, there are some Department of Public Safety investigators, the evidence-type fellows that are still in there taking pictures. We've seen video cameras and flash bulbs being used, so they are still taking some pictures. If you can see some bullet holes in some of the glass. But this is our first look inside the scene of today's mass killing, and that has been the development here. There is a rumor going around, Tracy, that at some point tonight, perhaps the news media will be allowed to go inside the cafeteria itself. That has not been confirmed as yet. It looks like many of the tables have been turned back upright since the shooting earlier today. In any event, if there are any further developments along this line, we'll give you a holler. Tracy?
Yeah, Chip, we'll check back just momentarily. Thank you very much. In other news, the city manager of the Colony is on probation tonight. Now to recap, today's shooting rampage in Killeen is the worst in U.S. history. Altogether, 23 people died when a gunman opened fire at Luby's Cafeteria in Killeen and then turned the gun on himself. Once again, Channel 8's Chip Moody joins us live from Killeen. Chip?
Tracy, something obviously snapped today in the brain of a 35-year-old Belton resident, Belton being about 7 or 8 miles from here. 35-year-old George Hennard, no prison record, but unemployed and apparently a very angry man. He was the subject of numerous complaints to the Belton Police Department from neighbors who complained the man was screaming and seemed to be mentally deranged. He was an angry man who let that anger spill over today at a crowded cafeteria dining room here on Highway 190 in Central Texas. During the lunch hour today, that anger turned into bloodshed. He drove his pickup truck into the main dining room of this Luby's restaurant and then methodically, deliberately shot and killed 22 innocent people. He was then shot and wounded by police in a gun battle, retreated to a bathroom, and apparently there committed suicide. Tonight, about 8 o'clock, 7 hours after the shootings began, authorities began the grim task of removing the bodies. Fortunately, we have not been advised that any children were involved. People were killed in the serving line, at their table. Some were run over by the pickup truck as it crashed through the front window. The carnage was described as incredibly gruesome, blood and bullet casings all over the floor. Tonight, the first time to look inside the scene, the cafeteria itself. DPS crime investigators are on hand, wrapping up their investigation. It should be pointed out that DPS crime scene investigators very rarely make an appearance in a community like this, but they are assisting the Killeen Police Department. Today's shooting has had a terrible impact, not only on this community in Central Texas, a town of about 50,000, but of course on the families of those who were killed or injured, and the list is very long. We know who. The man's name was George Hennard. We don't know exactly why, but obviously a very troubled man and an angry man, and today he took out that anger on innocent people. This is Chip Moody in Killeen. Tracy, back to you.
Chip, thank you very much. We'll have more tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
You've been watching the News 8 Update, the most watched news broadcast in the Southwest.